Imagine Paris, August 1911. The city is calm, bathed in the soft morning light of a quiet Monday. Inside the magnificent Louvre Museum, the day begins just like any other. The guards are at their posts, their footsteps echoing softly in the vast, empty halls. Cleaners and maintenance workers move through the corridors, their white coats blending into the scenery. It's a day of routine, of quiet efficiency, a day when the museum is closed to the public. Nothing seems out of place. No alarms are ringing, no glass is shattered. Everything is exactly as it should be. Except for one small detail, a very, very big detail. The Mona Lisa is gone. And for more than 24 hours, absolutely no one will notice. How could this happen? How could the most famous painting in the world simply vanish without a trace? Well, that's the thing. In 1911, the Mona Lisa wasn't the global superstar she is today. She was a valuable masterpiece, yes, but just one among thousands of treasures housed within the Louvre's sprawling walls. The security of the time was built on a foundation of trust and familiarity, not high-tech surveillance. Mondays were for cleaning and maintenance, a day when the galleries were quiet, almost deserted. This predictable, comfortable routine created the perfect cover for the crime of the century, and hiding in plain sight, among the legitimate workers, was a man with a plan. His name was Vincenzo Peruggia. Peruggia wasn't a master criminal or a sophisticated art thief. He was an Italian handyman, a former employee of the Louvre. He was a simple man, but he had one crucial advantage. He knew the museum inside and out. He knew the schedules, the layout, and most importantly, the blind spots. On that fateful Monday morning, he walked into the Louvre wearing the same white smock as the other workers. He was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. He didn't need to break in. He had simply hidden in a storage closet overnight. When morning came, he walked out of his hiding spot, blended in with the staff, and headed straight for the Salon Carré where the Mona Lisa hung. There was no elaborate heist. He didn't have to rappel from the ceiling or dodge laser beams. He just walked up to the painting, lifted it off the 4 simple iron hooks that held it to the wall, and tucked it under his coat. The painting itself is surprisingly small, about the size of a modern-day briefcase. Peruggia headed for a service staircase to make his escape. He ran into a small problem. The door was locked. For a moment it seemed his plan might fail. But as fate would have it, a plumber happened to be working nearby. Seeing a fellow worker struggling with a locked door, the plumber kindly opened it for him, unknowingly assisting in one of the greatest art thefts in history. Peruggia simply walked out of the Louvre, a Mona Lisa in tow, and disappeared into the streets of Paris. Back inside the museum, life went on. It wasn't until Tuesday morning, when the Louvre opened its doors to the public, that someone finally noticed the empty space on the wall. At first, the guards assumed the painting had been taken to be photographed or cleaned, a common occurrence. They weren't concerned. But as the hours ticked by and the Mona Lisa didn't return, a slow-dawning panic began to set in. The Mona Lisa was gone. The news spread like wildfire, first through Paris, then across the globe. It was an international sensation. The French authorities were humiliated. How could this have happened right under their noses? The police launched a massive investigation, questioning everyone who had been in the museum. The investigation was a media circus. Newspapers offered huge rewards for the painting's return. The police, desperate for a lead, even questioned the avant-garde painter Pablo Picasso. He and his poet friend Guillaume Apollinaire were known for their rebellious attitudes and had previously been linked to the theft of some small statues from the Louvre. Apollinaire was arrested and spent a week in jail, while Picasso was brought in for interrogation. Both were eventually cleared, but the incident added another layer of drama to the already surreal story. The world was captivated. For the first time, the Mona Lisa wasn't just a painting, she was a headline. Her face was plastered on every newspaper, on postcards, on advertisements. She became a pop culture phenomenon. Meanwhile, where was the world's most wanted piece of art? Tucked away in a cheap apartment in Paris, hidden in a false bottom of a wooden trunk, right under the nose of the police. Vincenzo Peruggia kept his prize for 2 long years. He wasn't trying to sell it for a fortune. His motives were, in his own mind, patriotic. He believed the Mona Lisa had been stolen from Italy by Napoleon and that he was simply returning it to its rightful home. This was historically inaccurate, of course. Leonardo da Vinci had brought the painting to France himself as a gift for the king. But Peruggia was convinced he was a national hero. He waited for the initial heat to die down, living a quiet life with his stolen masterpiece just a few feet away. For 2 years, the world wondered. Theories swirled. Was it a sophisticated criminal organization, an eccentric billionaire collector? Had the painting been destroyed? The mystery only deepened the Mona Lisa's allure. The empty space on the Louvre's wall became an attraction in itself. People flocked to the museum just to stare at the 4 hooks where she once hung. The theft had paradoxically made her more famous than ever before. Her absence had given her a presence she never had while she was there. She was no longer just a painting. The world wasn't just missing a piece of art, it was missing a part of its shared cultural story. Then, In late 1913, the case broke wide open. Perugia finally made his move. He traveled back to Italy with the Mona Lisa, still hidden in his trunk. He contacted an art dealer in Florence named Alfredo Geri, offering to return the painting to Italy for a reward. He signed his letter with a simple name, Leonardo. Geri was intrigued but skeptical. He agreed to a meeting, but he also wisely contacted the director of the Uffizi Gallery. Together they met with Perugia in his hotel room. Perugia, proud of his accomplishment, opened his trunk and revealed the long-lost painting. Geri and the gallery director authenticated it immediately. It was her. The Mona Lisa was found. The authorities were called, and Vincenzo Perugia was arrested. But the story doesn't end there. When his motives were revealed, he didn't become a villain in Italy, he became a folk hero. Many Italians celebrated his misguided patriotism. His trial was a spectacle, and he was given a surprisingly light sentence, just over a year in prison, of which he served only a few months. Italy, after briefly celebrating the painting's return to its homeland, honorably returned the Mona Lisa to France. Before she went back to the Louvre, she went on a celebratory tour of Italy, being viewed by thousands who saw her as a returning hero. When the Mona Lisa finally returned to the Louvre, she was no longer just one masterpiece among many. She was a global celebrity. The theft had transformed her. The 2 years she spent in a trunk in a Parisian apartment had cemented her status as the most famous, most recognizable, and most valuable painting in the world. The ordeal forced the Louvre to completely rethink its security, leading to the systems we see today. The Mona Lisa was eventually placed behind bulletproof glass, a fortress protecting a cultural icon. It's August 21st, 1911, a quiet Monday morning in Paris. The Louvre Museum, normally bustling with art lovers, is closed for maintenance. But inside, one man is not there to work. His name's Vincenzo Perugia, and he's about to pull off the most audacious art heist in history. What do you think you know about this story is likely just the beginning. How did one man, a former employee, walk into the world's most famous museum and walk out with its most famous painting? The truth is a thrilling tale of national pride, unbelievable luck, and a series of blunders so absurd they sound like fiction. Stay with me as we unravel the real story of how the Mona Lisa was stolen. He was an Italian handyman, a patriot who had worked at the Louvre just a year earlier. He knew the museum's layout, its routines, its weaknesses. The night before, he simply hid inside a storage closet. Yes, you heard that right. He spent the night in the Louvre. Imagine the cold, the silence, the ghosts of centuries of art surrounding him. He waited for dawn, dressed in the same white smock worn by the museum's maintenance staff. He was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. He blended in perfectly. No one gave him a second glance. This wasn't a high-tech operation. It was a plan built on simplicity and audacity. As the morning passed, Perugia moved deeper into the museum. He entered the Salon Carré, the grand gallery where the masterpieces were displayed. Inside the gallery, the air felt still. Paintings by Titian and Raphael lined the walls in silence. And there she was. The Mona Lisa hung quietly and guarded. In 1911, she wasn't yet the global icon she is today. She was famous, yes, but not protected by bulletproof glass and armies of guards. When the gallery was finally empty, Perugia made his move. He calmly walked up to the painting, lifted it from the wall, and tucked it under his arm. The frame was heavier than he expected, a solid piece of wood weighing nearly 200 pounds, but the room stayed silent. There were no alarms. There were no guards nearby. He carried the priceless masterpiece into a deserted service stairwell. There, he worked quickly. He removed the heavy, ornate wooden frame and the protective glass. Now, all he had was the canvas itself, painted on a thin poplar panel. He wrapped it carefully and tucked it beneath his white smock. It was a snug fit, but it worked. He was just another worker with a slightly bulky coat. At one point, a locked door blocked his path. For a moment, it seemed the plan might fail. A lesser man might have panicked, but Perugia remained calm. He was a handyman after all. He took out his tools, removed the doorknob and slipped it into his pocket. But the door still wouldn't budge. He was trapped. Just as frustration began to set in, he heard footsteps. Seeing Perugia, a man in a worker's smock, struggling with a door, the plumber assumed he was just another staff member who'd gotten stuck. Without a second thought, he used his own key to open the door for him, letting the art thief and his hidden treasure pass. Moments later, Vincenzo Perugia walked out of the Louvre's main entrance, into the bright Paris morning, not running, not hiding, simply leaving. He passed guards, fellow workers, and pedestrians on the street. No one noticed the slight bulge under his coat. No one suspected that the world's most famous painting was no longer in the world's most famous museum. He just walked away, melting into the city. For 24 hours, nobody even knew she was gone. It wasn't until the next day, on Tuesday morning, when a visiting artist came to the Salon Carré to paint a copy of the Mona Lisa, that he found a blank space on the wall. He casually asked a guard where the painting was. The guard assumed it had been taken to the museum's photography studio. It was common practice. So, they waited. Hours passed. Checks were made. The photographers said they didn't have it. Panic slowly began to set in. By late afternoon, the museum officials were forced to admit the unthinkable. The Mona Lisa was gone. The news exploded. It was a global scandal. The French press had a field day, mocking the police and the Louvre's security. Headlines screamed across the world, "How could this happen?" The French borders were sealed, and every ship and train leaving the country was searched. The police were desperate. They questioned everyone. They even questioned Pablo Picasso, who was briefly considered a suspect due to his association with a group of avant-garde artists known for their rebellious attitudes. The investigation was a mess of false leads and public hysteria. The police even dusted the abandoned frame for fingerprints. They found a clear thumbprint, but their filing system was so disorganized they couldn't match it to Perugia, even though they had his prints on file from a previous minor arrest. And where was the Mona Lisa all this time? Tucked away in a false-bottomed trunk in Perugia's small Paris apartment, just a couple of miles from the Louvre. For 2 years, the most famous painting in the world sat in a cheap, dusty room. Perugia went about his life. He read the newspapers chronicling the frantic search, likely with a quiet smile. He believed he was a hero. In his mind, he hadn't stolen the painting, he had rescued it. He was convinced that Napoleon had plundered the Mona Lisa from Italy, and he was simply returning it to its rightful home. The funny thing is, he was wrong. While Napoleon did loot many artworks, the Mona Lisa had been in France since Leonardo da Vinci himself brought it there in the 16th century, selling it to the French king. 2 years passed. The world had almost given up hope. The Louvre hung another painting in its place. Then, in November 1913, Perugia decided it was time. He traveled to Florence, Italy, with the Mona Lisa still hidden in his trunk. He contacted an art dealer named Alfredo Geri, offering to return the painting to Italy for a reward. He signed his letter simply Leonardo. Geri, intrigued but skeptical, agreed to a meeting, but he wisely brought the director of the Uffizi Gallery with him. Perugia showed them the painting at his hotel. They were stunned. It was authentic. They convinced Perugia to let them verify it at the gallery, promising to arrange his reward. The moment he handed it over, they called the police. Vincenzo Perugia was arrested. The man who had eluded the world's authorities for 2 years was caught by his own patriotic naivety. When he was put on trial, the Italian public didn't see him as a thief. They saw him as a national hero. His story of wanting to reclaim Italian heritage resonated deeply. He was treated with immense sympathy, and his trial was a sensation. Ultimately, he was given a very lenient sentence, just over a year in prison, of which he served only 7 months. Before being returned to France, the Mona Lisa went on a celebratory tour of Italy. Crowds flocked to see the recovered masterpiece. When she finally returned to the Louvre, her fame had skyrocketed. The theft had transformed her from a celebrated work of art into a global superstar.